Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Hi. So let me get a sense of the audience in terms of what kind of sandwich we're dealing with here. Okay. How many people here are caring for elderly parents in one way or another? Pretty much everybody. And how many of those who just raised your hands have children who are in emerging adulthood, children who are young adults or older? Okay. And how many of you are stressed? Okay. Okay. So that's and how many? Right. Exactly. Exactly. So let me talk. I mean, there are a lot of ways to bring this. Let me just share with you some of the research. I had a PowerPoint. It's totally my mistake. I brought it in the wrong format, and I'm not sure if it'll get here in time in terms of converting it to the right format. Totally my responsibility. But I'll just talk to you like they did in the old country, just old-fashioned talking. Okay. So here's what I'll talk about. First of all, it's important to understand the impact. In other words, you have to know what you're dealing with as the first step, because sometimes we have stress and we don't even know what it's coming from, especially when it's chronic stress. When you're constantly being faced with an ongoing kind of stressor, then you tend to get tunnel vision, you tend to get irritable, you tend to get on overload, you tend to get fatigued, like we just learned from the last talk. The kind of things that happen get in the way of clear kind of thinking. Here's what the research shows about people in the sandwich. It shows that physical indicators that are almost universal include fatigued, disturbed sleep. I'm sounding like Dr. Huberfeld, right? Physical symptoms like headaches, digestive problems. The body keeps the score. Okay, when we're under constant stress, there's a whole range of ways that our body tells us that we're on overload. Okay, restlessness. Then there's the emotional changes, and the emotional changes could be feelings of guilt, like you're never quite doing enough because you can't always be there. And how do you divide yourself in terms of being there for the parent versus being there for the child, and then having your regular life in terms of job responsibilities, in terms of responsibility. I mean, life is stressful even without being in the middle of the sandwich, right? So there's a guilt, there's anger at family members who don't help, which is a very common thing, where you'll have one or two family members who do the lion's share of the work, and you may either be quietly angry or noisily angry at that person, but they may not help for a variety of reasons. It could be because of I won't even speculate. I'm sure we could get a discussion going for the rest of our time just on that, right? But that's very common. Mood swings, feeling overwhelmed, becoming cynical. What is it that Oscar Wilde said? A cynic knows the price of everything and the value of nothing, you know? So you have that also, withdrawal from friends, and then becoming distracted and forgetful. Okay, so what do you do? What do we do about this? That's what this talk is about. And by the way, and there may be people in this room, although I doubt you'd be here if everything was totally stress-free, who have the experience and experience much more of the positives and not much of the negatives, because there are tremendous positives. You know, there are the positives of caring for an elderly parent where you get to spend time with them in a way that you didn't when you were much younger, where they may not have been available to you because of them, you know, because of their pressures, and now you have them. And you have, you know, this generation has the mitzvah of Kibud Av and Kibud Aim longer than any generation in history had. And both the costs of it, but also the benefits of it. So this could go in a lot of different directions. So let's talk about the what to do about this and then we'll figure out where it'll take us. Okay, we're good? Okay, so let's go. Number one has to do with the chickenpox analogy. Chickenpox analogy goes like that, like this. Okay? Imagine two families who have a child with chickenpox. Okay? One person, they have 5 children. This is their 5th child. The older 4 had chickenpox already. And their next door neighbor and best friend is a pediatrician. The other family, who has a child, same level severity of chickenpox. So that family is living in a rural area, no easy access to medical care, only child. They've never seen chickenpox before. They have no idea, is the child going to live? Is the child going to die? Is this some kind of fatal illness? Is it going to leave permanent scarring? And a million different questions. Same level of severity. In one case, pain in the neck, but no big deal. In the second case, it's something that is terrifying. What's the difference between case 1 and case 2, between the high level of stress and the low level of stress? Everybody, what's the difference? Knowledge. The power of knowledge. The power of perspective is everything. And to the extent that we could familiarize ourselves, even just by talking about it, by saying, there's a fascinating set of research on job burnout. Now, let's say you have a very stressful job that requires a lot of you, and you're feeling burned out. They say just the knowledge that the job is stressful and that you're having a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, just knowing that and being able to talk about it is actually about half the battle. Makes a big difference in terms of the level of stress and the level of burnout. So that's point number one. So point number one is just to educate yourself and allow yourself to have this kind of reaction, because that's what anybody is going to do in response to being in the middle of the sandwich. Does that make sense to everybody? Just sort of the power of it. I'll tell you a vignette that's going to sound a little off topic, but it's a vignette of the crying baby in the back of the room, because it shows me, because to this day it makes a difference in certain things that would have been stressful for me otherwise. I was giving a talk, I was scholar in residence in a large community somewhere not New York. And there were about 400 or 500 people in the room. And it was a post-Kiddush talk on Shabbos. It's before people went home. And it was people who seemed highly motivated to hear whatever I was going to say about whatever topic in parenting it was about. So it's a very motivated crowd. In the back of the room, there was a young mother who had a baby who was crying nonstop, crying in a way that was really driving everybody crazy. Nobody could hear anything I was saying. This is on Shabbos. There's no nice, great setup like here where, I just have to talk and you can hear me. And it was people were getting angrier and angrier. They were shushing. And the woman in the back wasn't moving. The baby was crying. She was holding the baby and walking, trying to soothe the baby, but the baby didn't stop crying. And people are screaming at her to leave. They're like really giving it to her. A man up front who was a Holocaust survivor gets up and he turns to the 400 people and he says, 70 years ago, when I was in Auschwitz, if you would have told me that 70 years from now, I'm going to be in a room, we're going to be hearing words of Torah integrated with words of psychology and how to raise a child, and there'd be a Jewish baby in the back of the room crying, do you know I would not have believed you? Do you know how amazingly, amazingly grateful I am for that baby in the back crying? He says, do you know what a miracle it is for us to be able to hear that baby at the same time that we're allowed to sit down and learn about our heritage and learn Torah and learn how to integrate into our lives? He said, we should be filled with feelings of gratitude that we're here. At that point, two things happened. The baby stopped crying. The baby did not cry for the rest of the talk, okay? Which is an interesting talk in itself. How did the baby know to stop crying? But the other thing that happened that was very, very clear was that it stopped bothering us. Had the baby cried from that day on, when I hear a child making noise in the back of a room, I think this really is a miracle. It's amazing. It's amazing. So that's the whole point, as the Baal Shem Tov said, B'makom shemachshavto shel adam sham hu nimtza ha'adam. You want to know where the person is? Look at their thoughts. And when our thoughts are able to deal with this ongoing chronic stress and see it as, okay, we have every right to be frustrated, but to understand. And to understand that, again, we're having a normal reaction to a truly stressful kind of situation. And to understand a little bit about some strategies that might help, that cognitive kind of intervention can really make an important difference. So that's the chickenpox analogy. Okay? Something that everybody who knew I was talking about this today came over to me. They said, you're going to talk about naming the monster, right? And because that's what I often like talking about. And I will, okay? Because I think it's so important. If I was showing you my PowerPoint, I'd show you a picture of what happens when you name the monster. The different parts of the brain that light up when you name the monster. But you don't need that. I'll talk it out. It's just as important. And it comes from the story of a very close colleague of mine who I was working on. We were working on a paper after 9/11. This is exactly 18 years ago. I think 18 years ago, this may even be the anniversary of when this event took place. We were working. He was a Harvard psychiatrist, and we were collaborating on writing on certain aspects of the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And we were working on a paper, but he was in New York from Boston, and he was working with the patient, who was a psychiatrist, caught in the stairwell of the World Trade Center on 9/11, who barely escaped with his life. And he comes running into my office, and he shows me a picture of a brain of this patient at the moment that he's having a flashback to the worst moment of his life. Literally, what does our brain look like when we're on overload? What does our brain look like when we're reliving something that literally is beyond endurance? And what you see when you look at it is Brokaw's area is shut down. The language centers of the brain is shut down, and you're literally rendered speechless. Whereas it says in the Torah, the word vayidom, right? Aaron being at a point of being beyond words. But here's where it gets interesting. As this psychiatrist working with this client gave words to this man who was suffering with severe post-traumatic stress disorder because of what he witnessed and how he barely escaped with his life 18 years ago on 9/11, as he gave him words for his pain, that's where the healing came. And the more he was given words for his pain, the more he was able to light up the language centers of the brain, the better he did. The better he did. And that's in general what happens when we could talk about what we're dealing with, and we could find somebody to share it with, and we could validate, like, of course I'm having a hard time, but I don't have to do this alone. I don't have to deal with it alone. Let me talk about it. Let me understand it. Let me hear it and kind of understand how normal this kind of reaction is. And understand that here's what helps, what other people have found to be helpful. And that whole array of interventions can really, doesn't undo the sandwich, but it makes the sandwich maybe a little more tasty. Okay, we're good with that? This all makes sense? Okay, next main point I want to talk about is to talk about the issue of connection. The issue of connection. Okay? We were just hearing from Dr. Huberfeld. He was using a tree as an analogy. And I was just thinking, we read in last week's parasha, Ki Adam Eitz Hasadeh, that we're compared to a tree. And the Maharal tells us that in what way is a person like a tree? He says a tree has roots and a tree has branches. And in terms of the roots, we stay connected to our sources of meaning and purpose in our history. In terms of the branches, we reach high. We reach out to God. We reach out to others. Right? So that's what this part is about. This part is about, to the extent that we could connect, here's the first point on it. Here's what researchers show. If you want to predict resilience in somebody going through chronic pain, chronic difficulties, one of the things they find is they say, let's say you only have one question to ask to predict resilience. Okay? They say, here's the question you should ask. Do you have one person in your life who you could wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to talk to them if you're having a tough time? Okay? An interesting question. They say if you have just one such person who you could reach out to, it could be a friend, it could be a relative, it could be a spouse, it could be a son, it could be a parent, just one person, if the answer is yes, that's the number one predictor of resilience. The day I saw that study, I must have primed my brain to wake up at 3 in the morning, and I shake my wife. I say, Lonnie, can we talk? Can we talk? And she gets up. She says, yeah, what do you need to talk about? I said, go back to sleep. And she doesn't remember it. Thank God. I got her in the middle of that stage of sleep. But the bottom line is that if we don't have such a person, that's fine. We could develop such a person. It doesn't really mean 3 in the morning. You can't deal with this kind of stress alone. You can't deal with this kind of stress. We could recruit. And if family members aren't being as supportive as they should be, the ultimate answer is going to be that there's a tremendous amount of chesed out there. There's a tremendous amount of loving kindness, a tremendous amount of support. There are organizations like Achiezer. There are organizations with amazing chesed. And it doesn't mean you call them 3 in the morning, but it means that you reach out. Because you know something? When you have somebody help you out because you're stressed out, you're actually doing them a favor. You know, let me share with you a study that I think is extremely important in terms of this topic. It's a study that always makes me smile. Listen to this study, okay? They look at elderly individuals, like some people in this room, including me, okay? You look at elderly individuals when they volunteer, because we always have the ability to deal with stress by giving to others. It's one of the best stress reducers in the world, right? The whole idea of the Hebrew word to give, natan, is a palindrome. When you give, you get back. So elderly individuals volunteer. They have a 40% lower probability of dying in a given year than matched controls. So when you're reaching out to somebody to ask them for support, when you're feeling totally stressed out, and you just can't do it, because you have to drive your mother to the doctor for a visit, and your child desperately needs you to help with babysitting, or she's going to lose her job, or whatever it might be with being in the sandwich, okay? When you figure out a way how to reach out to somebody, you're literally giving them a longer life. Let me continue with studies on this. Okay, in 1956, 427 wives and mothers who lived in upstate New York were followed for 30 years, regardless of their number of children, marital status, occupation, education, or social class. Those women who engaged in volunteer work at least once a week lived longer, had better physical functioning, even after adjusting for baseline health status. That may be one study. I have, if I was showing you my whole PowerPoint, I have something like 60 slides of study after study after study showing that when you ask somebody to help you and they help you, you are literally prolonging their lives. And you're leading to higher levels of happiness in that person. And you yourselves, to the extent that you could sometimes help yourself by helping others, as crazy as that sounds, it's, I think, a very important point to keep in mind. Okay? So in terms of the connection part of what we're talking about, I think that's something to keep in mind. And another part of connection, actually maybe I'll go to the next point, okay? Which is the point of talking, well, yeah, no, I didn't do the thing. I always do it. I have to do it on connection. Okay? Even though you've heard it to the point of nausea from me, many of you in this room, I recognize you. Okay? It's the study on being at the bottom of a hill. Okay? It's a great study. I'm going to add a study done by those researchers somewhat more recently, and I'll share that with you. So here's how it goes. Okay? They take people, they put them at the bottom of a hill. They say, estimate the steepness of this hill. If you're alone, you see the hill is very steep. If you have somebody at your side, the hill looks less steep. The closer you feel to the person at your side, the less steep the hill looks and the less tired you get going up the hill. And then the same researchers found just as strong a finding when you aren't suffering alone, when you reach out to others to get help. Hills start to look less steep. You know, it's the idea of, you take a parent or take a child to wherever you're taking them and you start sharing the stress with people, it literally changes your blood pressure and your pulse rate and your cortisol levels. In so many different ways, it makes all the difference in the world, okay? So that's I think, the main stuff I wanted to do in terms of the connection piece over here, okay? I'll just share with you one other set of studies about the power of being at somebody's side, okay? And it goes like this. Let's say a spouse is going to have a painful medical procedure, or a parent is going to have a painful medical procedure, and you sit at their side and you hold their hand. So let's say your father, your mother are going to have a painful medical procedure and you want to be there for them and you hold on to them. So you've probably all heard that has a powerful analgesic effect. It acts as a painkiller. They literally will experience less pain than they do if you're not holding their hand. There's something about physical contact that, leads to everything, all kinds of changes that lead to a reduction of pain. Now, let's say you're holding your mother's hand during painful medical procedures, but then because of all the stress that I was talking about before, you guys start to fight. You're not getting along well. And you go through a period of time where you want to kill your mother wants to kill you. You're just getting on each other's nerves in the ways that I talked about at the beginning. That's normal. It's bound to happen. But from that point on, holding the hand will have absolutely no impact on pain reduction. You could hold her hand all you want. It's not going to help. Then you go to a therapist, or you go to a good friend who could help you make peace so you're no longer fighting with each other. Guess what happens? Analgesic effect starts working again and you're no longer in a place of pain. But here's where it gets almost mystical. And nobody has figured out how to make sense of this, okay, in recent studies over the last 5 to 10 years. Let's say you're holding your mother's hand and she's having that painful medical procedure, okay? And you're getting along now and she's feeling better. But she has no eye contact with you. You're sitting in a place she doesn't see you. And some researcher asks you, rate on a scale of 1 to 10, how much empathy are you feeling for your mother now in her plight of having this painful medical procedure? Scale of 1 to 10. 1, a little bit, I'm feeling a little bit for her. 5, more so. 10, extreme empathy. Extreme levels of nosei ba'olam chavero, of sharing her burden. Turns out there's a direct linear correlation. The more you feel for her, the less pain she will feel. They don't know how it's communicated because they do all kinds of fancy things to make sure that it can't be communicated in any kind of way. This has nothing to do with anything other than a felt sense of emotion. It doesn't have to do with how much a hand's being squeezed or anything that any verbal cue. And I think there's something to it. I think we know it. I think when we feel for somebody, when we daven for them, when we're there for them in a way that our hearts are bouncing off each other, eye to eye, heart to heart. You know, we're set up in a way that we really can lessen a person's pain. That's why we're told, right? The Talmud tells us that when you visit a person at their sickbed and you're really there for them and connected to them, you take away 1/60th of the illness. This new research is showing that there may be a real strong neurobiologic component to that. So that's something you could do, and really I find people often don't get how important it is just to be there. Even if you're not doing anything, the power of being at somebody's side. Let me tell you a story, okay? Let me tell you a story about being at somebody's side. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go for it. Okay? Here it goes. Okay. Giving a different talk than I would have with the PowerPoints, which is probably better. I mean, I don't know if it's better, but it makes sense. Here it goes. Okay? This is a chauffeur story and a story of return, right? Okay, we're coming up to Rosh Hashanah. We're in Elul. We just blew the shofar this morning. Listen to this. I'm seeing a 17-year-old boy. He's the child of a major Rosh Yeshiva, major head of a school, like, you know, one of the superstar top black hat yeshivas in the world. So this kid is royalty in the yeshiva world. And he's the oldest. Has something like, 11, 12 younger siblings, but he's the oldest, setting the stage. And he became a rebel. His father was quite demanding, his mother demanding, his grandparents. And the more they demanded of him, the more he rebelled. And it was turning pretty bad. He started dressing in a way that was really problematic. He started hanging out with people who were not the kind of people his family wanted him to hang out with. And he was going from bad to worse. And his father asked me to please work with him. So I was working with him, and he was opening up, and he was talking. But it wasn't getting better right away. And the father and mother became very concerned that he was going to destroy all the younger children. At this point, the kid wasn't doing drugs, but he was dealing drugs because he had to support himself because his parents had cut him off for money. He became a drug dealer in a subtle way. He was very smart. He knew how to do it, but it was life-threatening, and the word was getting around the neighborhood, stay away from this famous rabbi's kid. They didn't, whatever. It was just not great for the reputation of the rabbi or the rebbitzin or the school. So at a certain point, the father of this boy, the famous Rosh Yeshiva, he said, I don't think I could have him stay at home anymore. He's destroying the whole family. He's destroying our marriage. He's destroying our family. And he goes to his rabbi. And he says, please tell me what to do. And the rabbi said, you know something? He's destroying your entire family. He's destroying them. You have to kick him out of the house. I was extremely upset. I was worried about the boy literally surviving being kicked out of the house because I knew he was going to now fall into a very, very bad crowd, even worse than before. I was worried about his creditors. I was just worried. And I was very upset, so I called the father up. I said, I'm telling you, we could figure out other ways of protecting your younger children from him, but please don't kick him out. So he says, it's not up to me. He says, you have to ask my posek, the rabbi I went to. So I said, do I have, and the posek said, no, you can't take him back in. He's destroying the whole family. So I said, do I have permission to go and talk to this posek? So I went. And I talked to the posek. I remember we killed off a bottle of Diet Pepsi, caffeinated, because every time for the next 5 years when I saw this posek's wife, he said, you know, my husband didn't sleep for the rest of the week because you caffeinated him so badly. But we talked. And the rabbi, this posek, was amazing. He just listened. He listened and listened and listened. Non-stop listening. And after listening nonstop, okay, he said, you know something? I was wrong. He's a giant of a man. He said, I was wrong. He said, but I'm not ready to have this boy go back home. Not ready, because I think it's but let's do it little by little. Let's arrange for him to go to an aunt and uncle who lives in the Midwest for Rosh Hashanah. This is exactly this time of year that this happened. So I like the idea very much. Let's get him back into a family setting, and then because at least he opened up. Let's have a plan. So he goes to the uncle and aunt for Rosh Hashanah. Saras Yemei Shuvi comes into my office, okay, to tell me how things went. He was back from the Midwest, and he's looking shaken, and I'm shaking. So when this kid's shaking, it means something really bad's going on. He says, Doc, you got to help me. I don't know what I'm going to do. He said, I went to stay with my aunt and uncle. Now, I'm finished with this religion. He says, look at me. He had piercings, and he had a nose. He was not looking like a Rosh Hashiva's son at all, okay? He said, but I felt bad for my aunt and uncle. I figured at least let me do them the courtesy of walking to shul at the end of davening on Rosh Hashanah and walking home with them. I'll stand back a little bit. People won't know our connection, but let me at least go there. I owe them that much. So I go to shul, and I blew it in terms of knowing how long shul on Rosh Hashanah takes. There was still the 40 last kolos, the 40 last blasts of the shofar. So I go into the back of the shul, and the shofar starts blowing. And with every blast of the shofar, I lost it more and more. He said, I thought I was done with this religion. With every blast, I start crying more and more. And by the time shofar blowing ended, I was wailing. He said, Doc, help me. What am I going to do? I thought I was finished, and now I see there's this. And you know what? That's when he started to come back. This was many years ago. About 5 years ago, I get a call from him. He's the president of a pretty large shul. Okay? Modern Orthodox shul, but you can't have everything. Okay? Some of my best friends are modern Orthodox. Okay? He's president of a modern Orthodox shul. Okay? He has a chavrusa with his father 3 times a week. His father hung up every mezuzah in the house. The total v'heshiv levavos al banim, a total reconciliation from the connection, the power of holding somebody's hand, the power of not cutting off. We could be angry. There's tremendous stress sometimes with being in the sandwich. But ultimately, the lesson of Rosh Hashanah is the lesson of the call of the shofar. Okay? I'm going to end with another shofar story with a slightly different theme, but let me move on. We're good here? Next and final point. So let's review what we did so far. We did the power at the beginning of knowledge, the power of psychoeducation, the chickenpox analogy after we reviewed a little bit what some of the cognitive and emotional normal reactions to being in the middle of the sandwich. We talked about that. Then we talked about the power and importance of naming the monster. I showed you that beautiful PET scan. Okay? You all saw that, right? Okay. Huh? Clearly. It's very clear. You see how when you light up the language centers of the brain, things look better? Okay, I'll show it again. Good. Okay. And then we talked about the 3 o'clock in the morning, the way I woke my wife up at 3 o'clock in the morning, the power being at the bottom of the hill, and then the research on volunteering in health. And then I told you the very depressing story. Now I'm going to end with talking about meaning. I'm going to try to do it as quickly as I can. Okay? Because ultimately I think it's the most important part. It's always a core coping mechanism to know how to view it, to know how to inject it with meaning. Here's what Dr. Salovey taught us about stress reduction. Dr. Salovey is the president of Yale University, one of the leading universities in the world, right? Dr. Salovey, before that, was the head of the psychology department. And he did a whole bunch of research, Dr. Salovey, showing that when you deal with stress, the stress like being in the middle of the sandwich, and see it as an engine of growth, you see yourself not as a log floating on the river at the mercy of the current, but you see yourself as in a position where you could grow. How do you grow by being in the sandwich? You grow. Look what you're doing. You're teaching your children and your grandchildren the power of kibbud av v'em, of respecting one another. You're modeling for your community kindness. You're bringing chesed into the world. You're hopefully developing gratitude. This coming week's parsha is all about, we start the parsha with the lesson of gratitude. And the more gratitude we get, gratitude for what our parents did for us. Okay? And perhaps in keeping with the theme of Rosh Hashanah, I'll share with you one shift in word that Rabbi Hauer shared with the group at a Chai Lifeline retreat a number of years ago. So it's parents of kids with chronic or life-threatening illness. And he said there are two ways of looking at your position. He says, think of the ram caught in the thistle, in the bush, at the story of Akedah Yitzchak, which we read about on Rosh Hashanah. Think about that image. So you have this ram caught. There are two ways of viewing that ram. You could see the ram as stuck, or you could see the ram as positioned. When you go from stuck to positioned, and this is exactly what Dr. Salovey said also, okay? When you go from stuck to position, I'm positioned in this stressful situation because it's what life is all about. Olam chesed yibana. Life is about kindness and giving to others and paying back with gratitude for what our parents did for us. And life is about giving to our children and letting them see this, because we know that that incredibly important message will be ultimately what will survive us after many, many years. It's all that really matters. It's all that really matters. So it's the meaning making. And what Dr. Salovey talked about is post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth, very similar to where Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik would talk about, where he'd talk about going with any stress. You could see it as go roll or see it as yiyud. You could see yourself as go roll. That I'm a loser. I have no control over my life. It's random. I was picked to be a loser. Or you could see it as yiyud. This is my destiny. And Dr. Salovey, who as many of you know, is, what's Salovey short for, everybody? Soloveitchik. The president of Yale is a descendant of the Brisker dynasty. He's also a Soloveitchik. He never knew this, but he came up with the exact same insight as his cousin, Rav Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, did, developing from a purely research standpoint the power of Gorol, the power of Yiyud over Gorol, the power of seeing the growth. When you shift what you see in that way, it literally is life-changing, including a study of, I think it was over 100 million people, I forget the exact numbers, that came out in a leading medical journal just earlier this year, that shows that when people are able to view health challenges through the prism of growth and not see it as something to be frightened about, okay, I'm getting the hook, it makes all the difference in the world. It's life prolonging. You live a longer life. I think it was 146 million people when you're able to see this lesson. This isn't fluff. This is this is facts. It's facts. And it's always in our power to do it. And our religion is all about it. Let me end with a final story. And again, I'll just end with the beautiful Medrash Tehillim, which I always love saying because it's so beautiful, that we have to view the stresses of being in the sandwich with the magnificent words of the Medrash Tehillim that says, Ilu nafalti lo kamti. If I never fell down, I never would have gotten up. Ilu yashafti bachoshech lo haya arli. If I never sat in the darkness, I never would have appreciated the light. That's the core thing. And now I'll end with a final shofar story. And it goes like this. My main area is trauma. My main secular areas, post-traumatic stress and stuff like that. So because of that, I sometimes am involved in different parts of the world after traumatic events. and I spent a couple of weeks in Sri Lanka after that terrible tsunami a number of years ago, and was there with a couple of fellow Americans working with 40 doctors who were charged with the physical and emotional recovery of the country. And an old friend of mine who was sent by Eretz Yisrael to also help out, we reconnected. An old friend, Jackie Goldman. Some of you may know her. She lived down the block from my parents, Leah Shalom, on Caffrey Avenue. Wonderful, wonderful person. So anyway, so we reconnected, and she's a brilliant trauma clinician. So in the height of the rocket attacks, okay, in Sderot, my wife and I went to have a cup of coffee with her. She always has the best stories. And I'll end with the final story coming from Jackie. She said that there was a period of time there was constant rocket fire. I know that it's gotten much better. Constant Sevedom, Code Red. And there was a Hasidische small shchuna next to Sderot, where there's a little Hasidische boy, 6 years old. Every time there was a Code Red, he'd go running like a madman, running all over the place. Rockets are flying. His mother's running after them. He goes into fight or flight, totally understandable. She can't catch him. Her life's in danger. This little boy's life's in danger. Nothing's working. And my friend, the therapist, nothing was working. Till finally the mother figured it out. She goes to her little 6-year-old boy. She says, you know, it's Elul. We're hearing the shofar every morning. And here's the 2 lessons of the shofar. Lesson number 1 is Uru Yeshena Mishinaslam. Get up, Code Red. Sevedom. We have to act. We have to act. And the second lesson is Imo Anochi B'tzar. We're not alone. God is here with us. Your mother is here to protect you, doing her part. Okay? We're not alone. That's the sound of the call. That's the meaning of the call of the shofar. From that day on, every time there was a Code Red, a big smile would get on the boy's face. He'd walk up to his mother, hold her hand, and calmly walk down to the shelter in plenty of time. Plenty of time, in seconds, but in time. And that's, I think, the bottom line. The bottom line is, as we think about how to deal with the sandwich, we always have control over the meaning we make of our stresses. And we have to remember that this is why we were created. We were created to be there for those who brought life to us. We were created to parent our children, the ultimate act of chesed. That's why we're here. Sure, it's stressful, but life's about stress. And I'll just end with one final thought. Forgive me, okay? Final thought. No. Okay, here's the final thought, because I like this thought. It's the thought from, I learned from Rav Matisyahu Solomon from Lakewood. So he quotes Reb Chaim Brisker. He quotes the following. He says, why is it this morning, when we said the Birchos Shachar, we said the brachos, right? Every morning we say these Birchos Shachar, and at the end, what's the last one? We say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Hanosein LaYa'ef Koach. Thank you, God, for giving tired people like us strength. So, Reb Chaim asks, isn't that strange? Once we're davening, why don't we daven not to be tired? It's fatiguing. That was the first symptom we talked about at the beginning of the talk. Why don't we daven not to be tired? Why don't we say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Hanosein Koach LaYa'ef. Wouldn't that make much more sense? So he says, no, we don't have a right to daven for that. Part of being alive is to be tired. Part of being alive is to do our best to deal with the challenges that come our way and to transform those challenges into engines of growth. Okay? And that's the Jewish way of looking at this. So may we all be zocha as we go into the new year to be able to meet those challenges and to be able to have the strength to deal with the fatigue. Thank you, everybody. Questions, thoughts, comments? We know it's going to be about your neighbors you're sitting next to, not about you.